So I lived alone in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for maybe 3 years or so, with no incident. Well, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me, so no incident, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I often find myself standing or pacing quite a lot. On this particular night, maybe about 2 a.m., I was pacing about while reading a textbook to prepare for an oncoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for just a minute and stood near my front door to read. That's when I suddenly heard my doorknob begin to turn. For some reason, though I nearly shit myself, I was able to calmly look down at my deadbolt to double-check that it was locked. It was. Whew. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was very confusing. I'm neither superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also kinda stupid, so my first thought was, is a ghost trying to break into my house right now? Thankfully, though, that thought immediately gave way to a more logical school of thought. Maybe they're going around the back. I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked as well. It was. Then my front door began to turn again. I tiptoe ran to the front door. At this point, my heart was pounding. My dog was staring at me from nearby with major concern in his eyes. I looked through the front peephole again, but there was still no one there. That's when I heard a small knock on my door as I was looking through the peephole. Then I heard a small child's voice cry out, "Let me in." Silence. "Let me in." I was still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand to make my breathing quieter. As I looked closer, I could see a small 3-year-oldish girl walk to the edge of my porch and look into the bushes. She nodded and then said, "Okay," in what I thought was supposed to be a whisper. She walked closer to the door again, and I lost sight of her in the peephole. She tried the handle once more and knocked, saying, "Please help me." My uncle is a cop, so I had heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacking. I was pretty sure that's what was happening at this point. I wasn't sure how to handle this situation though, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, yeah, I think someone is trying to break into my apartment. Yeah? My address? I'll stay on the line then." I then saw a shadow emerge from my bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid up and ran off. There were 2 people, plus the kid. People who tried to break into my apartment to rob or kill me? Let's not meet. Six years ago, I was a new mom, learning to balance my job, family, and health. My social life primarily existed on the internet at this time. Facebook and Instagram were the main ways I kept in contact with others. I received a friend request from Steven, an old friend from high school. I accepted, and everything was normal for a while. After a couple of months, Steven sent a DM asking how I was. The conversation itself was fine, but it didn't take very long for me to realize that this was not the Steven I knew. They had the same first and common last name. His profile picture was not a picture of himself, so I never realized this was a different person. Either way though, we had several mutual friends and he didn't do anything especially creepy, so I figured it was no harm in leaving him on my friends list. He would occasionally message me for a friendly chat, and seemed like someone that was a bit socially awkward but fairly harmless. I would respond, but we would always keep the conversations quite brief. One day I got a text from him, which surprised me greatly because I never gave him my number. I asked him how he'd gotten it, and he said from my website, which I guess was fair. I am an artist and had an email and phone contact info on my art site. He began texting several times a day, and I would give short responses followed with something like, "At work, talk to you later," or "Dinner with the fam, have a good evening." He started talking about his new boyfriend, saying that he was one of the few gay conservatives and things were going quite well. I told him I was glad that he had a partner that aligned with him and wished him well. He then began talking a lot about conservative politics and was quite aggressive about it. I told him I was liberal, so it was probably best if we didn't have those kinds of conversations. His messages quickly began turning sexual, or he would ask if I wanted to hear about the sex parties him and his boyfriend threw. I told him no, I didn't really know him and that was quite inappropriate. One day I was busy with work and returned to my phone to see dozens of messages from him, angry that I wasn't responding. He went on and on, sharing these very graphic sexual stories. I responded and told him I had been polite with him because he seemed like he didn't have many friends, but this was too much, and I was going to be blocking him. I told him I didn't even believe he was really gay. He was probably just saying it in an attempt to make me think he was harmless. I proceeded to block him on social media, and I blocked his phone number as well. A couple days later, I started getting lots of friend requests from accounts I didn't have mutuals with, and no friends. I knew they were probably fake pages he was creating. I would block them and move on. And then I began getting phone calls and texts from fake phone numbers. Same thing, I would block them right away and move on. I messaged our mutuals to ask what they knew about him, and it seemed that none of them actually knew him. The stories were all the same. One day he had just friend requested them out of nowhere and they accepted. He began sending requests to my friends, family, and even the other women in my dance troupe. I let everyone know they needed to block him. For months, not a day passed by that I did not get a weird call or friend request or DM. It would range from a normal "how are you" to vague threats of "I could make you talk to me if I really wanted to." He lived several hours away, so I wasn't particularly concerned about a physical confrontation. Things eventually got quieter, until one evening my notifications started going off like crazy, and my phone was ringing with tons of unknown numbers. It was on my art page. Probably 15 different accounts had posted porn on my page, with things like "OP is a whore," "OP is a thief." I knew it was him because he was also accidentally posting from his real account as well. I never realized that I didn't block him from that page. He also sent a message to my art page saying sorry for that, and he missed his friend and was just trying to get my attention. I didn't respond though. I blocked him and called the police. Of course, since stalking and harassment laws are notoriously awful, they didn't do anything. Later that night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. for no reason other than that I was just having trouble sleeping. I was up for a while playing on my phone when I started hearing this strange sound coming from the living room. It was back and forth between quiet cracking and scratching. At the time, we lived in a large ranch house, and the living room was at the other end of a long hall. I got up, thinking that my cats were into something, or maybe after a mouse. I flipped on the living room light, and the sound stopped. I scanned around looking for my cats when I noticed an open window. Our windows were large from floor to ceiling and opened by pulling them down from the top. The top of the window still had pry marks on it, and the lock was clearly broken. Thankfully, this house was old, and the windows did not open easily. He had only been able to get it open about 8 inches. I woke my husband up, got my son out of his room, and called the police. I just knew it was Steven. It was too big of a coincidence that he blew up that day, and then someone tried to break into my house in the middle of the night. We couldn't prove it was him, though. There was no evidence other than what happened that day that pointed to him. The police spoke to him, and I believed that it scared him enough to finally leave me alone. I was obviously horrified at the time and began looking up anything I could find out about him. I wound up finding his YouTube channel, which solidified my fears even more. He would post these huge Rush Limbaugh-style rants, and he would get angrier and angrier until he was red-faced and nearly spitting. He frequently talked about violence as well, and would show off his gun collection. This led me to finding his real last name. I googled it, and found that he had been arrested 2 years prior for holding a woman against her will in a hotel as he attempted to assault her. Thankfully, she was able to escape with only a bloody lip. We moved not long after. I wanted neighbors and off the farm. I removed my phone number from my site and locked down all of my social media. I still sleep with a baby monitor in my son's room because I'm so scared of someone coming in at night. His YouTube channel shut down after a bit, and I haven't heard from him since. When I was 19, I lived abroad in Australia. As an American with our absurdly high age for drinking legally, I was completely new to drinking culture, going out and basically having independence. While I was definitely, sometimes a lot, on the naive side, my mother had impressed a healthy sense of caution into my thick teenage skull. Thank God she did, because while I was there, I was met with a very creepy encounter. I was roaming all alone on a weeknight through Chapel Street in Melbourne circa 2013. The area is full of bars and shops, and it was around 7 or 8-ish. A random man stopped me and asked what I was doing since he wasn't up to anything. He also told me I was cute. He claimed to be waiting for his wife and that he needed some company. I was caught off guard and opted to be nice because my societal training to be nice all the time. I remember though, immediately warning bells began quietly ringing. I kept trying to skirt out of the conversation, but he kept adding pressure to stay. I was inexperienced and not confident enough to feel sure of how to safely end this strange encounter I was in. He then introduced himself as Michael. While Michael roped me into stopping at a nearby bar, he wanted to buy me drinks and kept trying to fish past the very vague details I was giving him, i.e., I work in this suburb and I live in this US state. Again, feeling pressure, I bought my own drink when we got to the bar. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that I was letting him hold a drink where I couldn't see it. Once seated, Michael wanted to see my driver's license, since he didn't really believe I was 19. I wasn't foolish enough to give him my license though. Fuck that. He pulled out his, which I'm sure was a manipulation tactic to try and get me to do the same. I redirected the convo to see when his wife that he was waiting for would get there. He accidentally let it slip that he didn't have a wife. The gentle alarm bells had turned into a clanging chorus. I fully realized I was well and truly in an unsafe situation. I said I had to use the restroom, and while he was distracted, my plan was to slip out unseen. Like a complete dumbass, I didn't expect this overly attentive man to pick up on it, but he did pick up on what I was doing. He was trying to flag me down, and I used this opportunity to whip out my phone and walk myself out the door. By the time Michael caught up, I was on the phone with the taxi service, since I knew it would be unwise to go to the Windsor train platform where he could follow me, and there were significantly fewer people as well. Under the guise of keeping me safe, he followed me out and walked me down to the street. Then, I shit you not, Michael offered to get his car and give me a ride home. I was completely spooked at this point and began protesting much more firmly. I vehemently said how I didn't need him, the taxi was already coming, but he just pressed harder and harder. He told me I could call the family I lived with and be on the phone with them while he took me home, which, if I let him, I obviously realized that A, it would let him see where I lived, and B, if I got into his car, I would lose agency and control. He could easily overpower me. At my continued protests, he relented, but he wasn't done yet. He wrote down his number and told me to call him to hang out. The taxi finally pulled up at this point, effectively ending the conversation. I hopped in, told the taxi driver to go, and when I looked back, Michael was watching the entire time. Between the insistence to stay at my side, lying about the wife, trying to buy me drinks, wanting to see my license, and get me in a car to take me to where I lived, something was very wrong. Now in present day, I'm not prey to the be nice no matter what lie. With him, I had the feeling, the warning feeling, the one where you know whatever happens next will be bad news. I'm more cautious and assertive now. I plan on ingraining that mindset fully in future generations I have influence on. The lesson of don't be afraid to be a bad bitch if you get the feeling that something is unsafe and wrong. When I was a kid, I had a creepy encounter with a grown man. His half of this was much longer than mine. I think this is important to the story. I was a preteen when this happened, but I hit puberty early enough that I looked like a young teenager. We used to have a tiny barn on my property, and it was my job to milk our dairy goats every morning. So, every single morning at almost the exact same time, I'd be in the back corner of our lot to milk. It was in a fairly isolated area of our yard, and between 3 neighbors' fields and pastures, which was intentional since goats can be quite talkative. It was right beside our neighbor's chain-link fence/grapevines. I'd sing fairly loudly every morning since there was generally nobody to be bothered, and it calmed down the goats as well. This meant it was easy to know there was a girl back there every morning and night. This particular morning, my mom had a bad feeling and made my little brother go out with me this time. He was bored, so he messed around and collected eggs while I milked. There were little windows dotted all around the barn, including a wide one right behind me. The doors were wide open, so I figured he'd come back eventually. Well, I saw him walk past the doors and start talking to somebody. I figured it was the neighbor, so I didn't worry when he said, "Okay, I'll go get my mom then," and took off running. I heard the chain-link fence behind me rattle. I turned around, just in time to see a man launch himself over the chain-link fence and into the neighbor's yard. He had been watching me the entire time, waiting since before I got into the yard. I don't know what he would have done if my mom hadn't made my brother go with me that morning. I did get out of solo goat milking in the end though, so I guess that's a plus. This happened in my senior year of college, and I lived off campus at the time. I had 2 roommates in my apartment townhouse thing, named Natalie and Katie. Anyway, Katie was out that night doing homework in one of the old school buildings. I was suddenly awoken at 3 a.m. when I heard some knocking at the door downstairs. I thought that was weird considering the hour, but I figured somebody must have the wrong place and would quickly realize and then leave. The knocking didn't stop though, and I lied in bed for a good several minutes thinking, yeah, they'll go away now. They'll go away. They'll get bored. As one might expect though, I quickly started to grow confused and then kind of freaked out by this person's persistence. Then the knocking turned into banging and I could no longer ignore it. Honestly, I probably should have called the police instantly, but it was the middle of the night and I was just so confused. I headed to the top of the stairs to see Natalie standing near the door, just staring at it. Her room was on the bottom floor, so she had just walked up to it now. We exchanged a baffled look because what the heck? It's 3 a.m. This is hella weird. Natalie called out and asked them who they were and what they wanted. "Oh, we're friends of Katie's," said a voice on the other end, who sounded male and about our age. We know her boyfriend and we heard she was feeling down, so we came to surprise her." This was already a weird cover story, because again, it was 3 in the morning. Thankfully, Katie wasn't even home, so we informed them of this. "Katie's not here, she's off doing something else." Good, this meant they were going to leave, right? They came here to see Katie after all, and she's not here, so they'll leave us alone and we can go back to sleep. Just open the door. I know. If I hadn't called the police before, I definitely should have done it now. It was weird though. That night I realized why people do stupid things in horror films. Not only had I been woken up out of nowhere, but it felt so surreal to be in a situation like this. Almost like there's no way you could actually be in danger. I mean, that only happens in horror movies, true crime documentaries, questionable, creepy stories online. It would never happen to me. I'm just an ordinary, random, boring person going about my business. There's that thought of, I don't need to call the police. I'm sure this will get cleared up and everything will be fine. So, Natalie and I did the stupid thing and tried to argue with them. We told them that again, Katie wasn't here, so there was no need for them to stay. Eventually, Natalie asked what their names were. Throughout the encounter, we had made out 2 distinct voices, but only one gave us a name. I texted Katie without telling him, asking if she was friends with someone with that name. After a couple minutes, during which we were still arguing with these strangers, Katie replied, "I am, but I don't think she knows where I live." That wasn't good, but even worse, she? The person on the other side of the door clearly had a male voice, so this was a real name, but not a real person. Whoever this was knew stuff about Katie, like who she hung out with and that. I told Katie to stay where she was and not come back until we told her everything was okay. Finally, we told the guys that if they didn't leave, we were going to call the police. No, don't call the police. Don't call the police, okay? If we wanted to do something bad, we would have already done it, right? Yeah, that last bit wasn't exactly helping their case. Just open the door, okay? The attempts at reasoning with them basically devolved into them telling us to just open the door over and over again until we finally did actually call the police. We hid in Natalie's room and dialed 911 and explained what was going on. Thankfully, there was a police station quite close by, so it wouldn't take long for them to arrive. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of heading back into the living room and yelling through the door that we'd called the cops. But contrary to what you might think, that actually didn't seem to scare them at all. In fact, it seemed to only mildly upset them, and they kept trying to get in. To this day, I can only assume they just didn't believe us or something. We heard the neighbor's door open, and a very pissed off man's voice calling out, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." For whatever reason, that was what caused them to freak out, and they drove off. The police arrived, and we told them the whole story. Natalie revealed that a couple of times she had just barely peeked through the blinds of a window close to the front door, and she noted that there were 2 guys, but only one of them was ever at the door at any given time. They would switch, with one at the door and the other sitting in the driver's seat of a car parked just out front, presumably for getaway purposes. So, yeah, that's reassuring. They also hadn't looked drunk, according to Natalie, and definitely hadn't sounded like they were either. There wasn't exactly much the police could do besides sweep the area a bit, but they told us that if the strangers showed up again, to immediately call instead of engaging with them at all. One of the officers also gave us some self-defense tactics and told us what kinds of household items and chemicals would work best for a situation like this in the future. After making sure everything was okay and reassuring us, they left, and we eventually called Katie and told her the weirdos were gone. She arrived and was quite understandably a bit shaken herself. We sat down and tried to talk her through who might have known where she lived. She did know people who had come to the apartment, so some people certainly, but Natalie didn't recognize the guys outside as any previous visitors. Worse, it turned out that not only did they know Katie's friend's name, but they also claimed to know her boyfriend and his name, even though he didn't even live in the same state we were going to school. She swore up and down she didn't know anyone who would want to hurt her. By this point, it was around 5 a.m., so I didn't even bother trying to go to sleep, since I was going to a workshop that morning. I told a lot of my classmates the story, and it freaked them out too. The entire day, Natalie and I jumped at every unexpected noise, every shadow, every random movement. That night, it was hard to sleep. I expected to hear them knocking at the door at any second. Thankfully, though, they never came back. Ever. But that almost makes things more unsettling in a way. I'll never, ever know what they wanted that night. Did they think we were hiding Katie from them? Was she seeing some less than savory people in secret? Did they want to hurt her? If they did, why did they never give up and go looking for her elsewhere? Was all of that just an excuse to get into the apartment of a young woman? Did they want to kidnap us, hurt us, rob us? Who knows? I try not to let it bother me, but I wish I knew if my life was in danger that night. I have a feeling it might have been. After all, they weren't wearing any face coverings, so if they wanted to commit a violent crime, they might want to get rid of the witnesses. But despite how much I wish I knew, I guess I'll never know. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run two other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.